for indie musicians.
Hello, this is G.E. Shaw, SIME Mixar Radio Tonight. And coming up next is Rhani and Friends. And on today's show, Rhani will be speaking with her best friend, well-known writer, author, and knows a little bit about the music world. So here we go. This is Rhani Touche.
Excited about this show because you guys are just going to love my guest tonight. Her name is Jan Sikes, and she has written several books. I've read a couple of them, and she's actually pretty darn good. So if you like reading well-written work, then you'll have to go check out her stuff when we're done. But, Jan, I'm so glad you could be here tonight. How are you doing?
Oh, it's my pleasure, Rhani. I'm doing great, and I'm so excited about this. This is fun.
Now, you're down in Texas, correct?
I am. I live just north of Dallas in what I call the Metro Mess. It's just a very highly populated area and lots of people in traffic, and it was quite a culture shock for me moving from such a small town in West Texas where the population was less than 6,000 up here to this Metro Mess. It was culture shock.
Wow. Yeah, my sister married a minister, and so the first, 10 or 15 years that they were married, they moved quite a bit because he kept changing churches, and he ended up in some really small towns.
Right.
And it was really, Tacoma is not that huge, but to go to, some of these tiny places where he was at was, like you said, it was culture shock, just such a difference between the two.
Yeah, it literally used to take me 5 minutes tops to get from one side of town to the other, and that was if I hit the one red light.
One red light?
So, needless to say, living up here in close to Dallas, and part of Dallas is just, it's very congested and very busy, but it's okay. I'm liking it. It's there's a lot to do and a lot of people to meet, a lot of music to hear, and so it's great.
Good. I'm glad. I've been through Texas. I remember I was told when I headed to Oklahoma, the sun is risen, the sun is set, and here I is in Texas yet.
That is so true.
Yes, it is.
It's a big state.
I'll tell you something. My most vivid memory of Texas, I don't even know where we were, but we were in Texas, and we stopped at this little tourist trap. It was a little store, and you walked in, and there was a bunch of glass display cases with local things that people had done. Mm-hmm. And I was walking by and looking into the cases, and I noticed a lot of these freaking ginormous flying things. I think they looked like huge grasshoppers, maybe. I'm thinking they were locusts. But they were, and then I'm looking around, and they're on the floor. They're on the shelves. And I said, I've got to go to the bathroom. So I went to the ladies' room, and as I'm pushing open the door, I can hear these bugs being moved along. So I get into the bathroom, and I look down on the floor, and it's like, oh, no way. This is not, my pee literally shot back up into my bladder, let me tell you. It's like, no way am I sitting down and doing this with these things in here.
Well, I will tell you, there are certain times of the year, and this is just a true story, that the crickets come through, and the street will literally be black and slick from the cars running over the crickets.
That's probably what these things were. They were huge, though.
Yeah, they can be big. And they jump.
Oh, yeah. We have crickets here, but they're about from the tip of my finger to the first knuckle, second knuckle, maybe. These things are probably 6 or 8 inches long.
Well, everything's bigger in Texas.
Yeah, you're right. They were just making themselves right at home, and this lady behind the counter is like, would you ladies like to try one of our ice cream sundaes? And I'm like, no.
Huh? No, I just went out.
Yeah, exactly. So that was my experience in Texas, but it is beautiful too. Now, you've lived in Texas all your life?
No, I was actually born in New Mexico.
Oh.
And lived there until I turned 18. And then I moved to Texas.
And that was when you put on the G-string, correct?
That was pretty close. Actually, I never wore a G-string, but I did wear, I mean, it was the time period, we're talking early 70s, or mid-70s, and the go-go dancers did wear costumes, but wasn't a G-string. Usually a midriff top that had some kind of fringe hanging off of it and little short shorts. And white go-go boots.
Yes. I have a go-go story for you. There was a lady that lived in there was a lady that lived in Tacoma many, many years ago. And she went by the name of Granny Go-Go.
Okay.
And this is when I was working at this little strip club downtown Tacoma. And she used to come in. She was bored, I think. And she liked to come in and hang out and talk to our customers, which, you know, none of us had a problem with. She was fun. She was probably 70 or 75. And she'd come in her little go-go costume. And if the music was right, she'd get up on stage and dance. And I'll tell you what, she was fun to watch. The girl was good. She used to go to the Puyallup Fair when the Beach Boys would come and play, and they would invite her up on stage to dance while they were performing. And she was just thrilled to do that. It was the highlight of her life.
Oh,
and she was just a blast. I went to visit her one time shortly before she died, and she showed me this book that she had written. It was her life story, and it was just full of pictures of her at all ages, you know, doing this.
Wow.
And, yeah, I mean, the history in that book was just amazing.
Well, how cool that she actually did that and put it down in a book.
Exactly. Exactly. I was never a go-go dancer. I always thought it would have been fun to do that, and I'm so jealous that you did.
Well, you know, it was just, it was the time, really. And I was so very young and freshly away from a very strict religious home, and I was determined I was going to do everything that had been forbidden. And so one of the things that I loved, always I loved, was music, and especially live music, but I wasn't old enough to get into the clubs. So there was just this one club who had lost their liquor license for serving to minors, but they had live music, and I could go there. And so that's where I learned to go dance, and that's also where I met Rick Astley.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Rick, if that was where you met him.
It was. And in my first book, Flowers and Stone, the opening scene is, and I'll use character names, because when I wrote these books, I never set out in life to be an author. I really didn't. That was never my goal. That was my sister's goal. She always wanted to be a writer. That wasn't my goal. But as life goes and things happen, there was just this big, ginormous story that needed to be told. And I woke up one morning and realized that I was the one that was going to have to tell it, because I was the only one that was there. I would have to have told the entire thing to someone else to write it. So I took writing classes, and I got busy and started writing. But then when I very first started writing the books, I was writing in first tense, which means like the I and me, and like all personal me. And I couldn't do it because it is such a personal story. So I was sitting around with my girlfriends one day, and talking about what a struggle I was having. And one of the girls said, well, why don't you just create characters and tell the story through them? And it was like a light bulb moment, because that was like, okay, yes. So that's what I did. So when I talk about my books, I talk about Luke Stone and Darlena Flowers, because it's just like an external, it's an extension of me and of Rick Sikes, who I named Luke Stone for the book, and Darlena Flowers was me. So anyway, as Flowers and Stone opens, Darlena is in this club that doesn't serve liquor because she's too young, and Rick Sikes and his band, or Luke Stone and his band, come into the club, and it causes such a commotion and a stir that Darlena is very drawn, and so she trades with another waitress to wait on their table, and that's the beginning. And that's really how it started. That was exactly how it started.
That is such a phenomenal book. I have to say, you and I were talking before the show started. I have such a hard time with anything that even remotely touches on romance.
Right.
You know, because for the most part, they bore me.
Yeah.
I don't find them realistic.
Right.
And I'm not criticizing romance authors at all. A lot of them are very, very good. This is just my personal, I guess,
Sure.
hang up with
Sure.
romance. But I have to say, and maybe it's because your book was not fictional; it was true. I did not get one moment while reading Flowers and Stone that made me, reach for the barf bag. Not even one.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that.
I was captivated by it. I was in love with the characters. And everything just felt real to me, because it is real. But normally,
it is real.
First-person books are often very hard to read because a lot of times the author gets a bit pompous.
I agree.
And that didn't happen either. And I think that didn't happen because you were writing fictional characters.
Right.
So,
and by doing that, by using the characters to tell the story through, it allowed me to step back and be a little more subjective and just let the story be told rather than being in the middle of wallowing around in it. So yeah, and it was, people ask me how much of the story is fiction and how much is truth, and I tell them that it's 95% truth, because there were some scenes in the book and in each book that I wasn't personally present for a conversation. So I had to make up the conversation, knowing what happened, but not being there for the conversation. Like, for instance, in Flowers and Stone, and you may remember this, when Luke went next door to the other apartment and met with those men that he was doing business with, I was not there. I didn't hear that conversation. So those parts of it are made up because I wasn't there. But every single event in the books did happen.
Wow. I am so looking forward to getting to the next book in the series. I have to read through a few to get there, but I am in love with these characters. I'm in love with your books. So tell us a little bit about Rick. What kind of a person was he?
He was very charismatic. He was a very talented human being. He had spent his not even adult life, from the time he was 14 years old, he had spent his life making music. He was a road musician. He wrote music and played music. And at the time I met him, he had been on the road for about 20 years at that point. He was a lot older than I was. Right. And so he honestly, at the point where I met him, he was burnt out. He wanted out. He wanted off the merry-go-round, but there was no way to get off. because all of these other people depended on him for a living. I mean, the band members had to feed their families. There was no way to just say, I'm stopping.
Right.
That was not in him to do that. But he was very burnt out on it. And he had had so many near successes in the business. And then disappointments when a deal would fall through, or when a record deal would be all talked up and then not happen, and things like that. Right. So, it's a hard business. It really is. It's a very difficult business, and any musician out there running up and down the road will agree, because it's not easy, and you've got to have a love for it. You've got to have a true passion for it to do it. If you're in it for the money, might as well get out. It's kind of like writing.
Yeah. I can see the similarities, absolutely.
So he was a big guy. He was a tough guy, and he had made quite a name for himself. And people kind of tiptoed around him, or they either loved him or feared him. And I think I said that in the first chapter of Flowers and Stone, and watching the people react around him, it seemed to me that they either loved him or feared him, or maybe a little of both. But so anyway, he just was a very, very talented person, and honestly didn't even know, or maybe even recognize, all the talents that he had, until life kind of threw a curve and everything came to a screeching halt. But he was bigger than life, and he was always a leader. He was always the one that made the decisions and that kind of thing. So I will say that when he went on stage and he picked up his guitar, he had the ability to bring the audience in with him, and whatever he was like, he could manipulate the audience and make them feel what he wanted them to feel. He had that gift. And so that was kind of him in a nutshell. He was tough. He was mean. If he had to be, he could also be very gentle and loving.
He just sounds amazing. There was when I was quite young, I don't know, young, 18 or so. There was a local band here in town, and I was quite the groupie. And there was one of the guys in the band that I was involved with for a minute or two, and there's just something about, I know I'm not the only person that says this, but there's something about a musician, especially, I am such a sucker for bad boys, let me tell you. Now, you put a guitar around a bad boy's neck, and I'm just melting on the stage, you know.
Yeah, that was Rick.
Yeah, exactly. So
that was him.
Exactly. I kind of get it. I do.
Yeah, that was him.
So now,
and there was a scene also in Flowers and Stone where, and I'm sure you may remember it, where he had an altercation with a man, and which happened frequently. I mean, you're in the nightclubs, people are drinking, they get out of hand, and he didn't put up with any nonsense. So, but that particular night, it got very violent, and I had no idea what had gone on, because this happened in the men's room. But he cut the man's face because he wouldn't shut up. He wouldn't leave him alone. He wouldn't get out of his face. So he really did kind of mess him up. But it's just that being that person in the public eye you've got to be something. You got to be something if you're going to do that.
Right.
And so for him, it just came very natural to be the tough guy.
Well, and it sounds like he was big enough to pull it off.
He was. He most certainly was. Yeah. So, you know, you have to kind of look at this scenario of that. Here I was, so young and freshly away from such a restrictive growing up, religion-based household. And I mean, this guy, he set me on my heels, and it never stopped. It never stopped. And so the second book, the first book, and I don't want to give away the story, but I do want to kind of move into the second book, and that the first book ends with Rick being convicted of 2 bank robberies and sent to prison. And
it was so rough.
That changed everything. That changed everything. Of course. And so then I moved. That's where I ended. So maybe that's why you like Flowers and Stone. It didn't have a happy ending.
That probably has a lot to do with it, because really, I mean, no offense to anybody, but I don't like those little sweet, saccharine, happy endings where, you know, the boy gets to be with the girl and they live happily ever after. And
because they're not real.
No, they're not real. They're not real. And usually something happens that ensures that they will have this wonderful life, like the rich boy and the poor girl, and his family doesn't like her because she's poor. But at the end of the book, they decide that they like her, which means now not only can he be with her, but he's not going to be disinherited. So now they're going to have money, and he's going to inherit the company, and their life is just going to be perfect. And it's just like moves.
That just because that doesn't happen, that's not real. And so I get what you're saying. That's just not real life. And I think that ultimately in each of us, we do like stories that depict real life more so than fantasy.
I think so.
I think so too, because I mean, you think about some of the greatest movies that have ever been made that people have just still love after years and years and years, and usually they're very full of conflict and hard times, and sometimes death.
Yeah.
So I think that we do like true life stories. We really do. And so anyway, back to the book. So it moves. The story is told through 4 separate books. It took 4 to do it. I thought I was going to tell it all in 3, but the third book got absolutely way too long. And I had to find a place to divide it. But this whole journey of tackling this project and doing it from start to finish has just been life altering for me. Because, like I say, there wasn't anything I ever set out to do. The story just had to be told. And for years, when he was still alive, and people would come through our home and through our lives, and I can't even count the number of people that would say, someone needs to write your story. And we would agree, yeah, they do. I actually always thought my sister would do it, but she put it right back in my lap and said, no, you got to do it. Just like she used to do my homework. She used to put it right back on me and go, no, you got to do it. And I'm glad she did. I really am. I would take nothing for the journey of doing this. It's been amazing.
I can imagine that, yeah. It would just be so interesting to go back through time and relive some of this again while you're writing?
And I did. I mean, it was actually very therapeutic in many ways. And I think it was the perfect thing for me to do, to process all of it and to put it down into words and on paper. And then that kind of allows me to move forward in life and see what's next. I don't know. I have no idea what's next. But I know that I got this story told, and I love talking about it. I love it when people read it. I love getting reviews and getting kind words back. Or if it touches one person, then I'm happy. And each one of the books carries a different theme. And the first book is just that daring to take that leap of faith and go for it. Just go for it. Because that was really what it was. And then the second book is all about learning to be positive and becoming a positive thinking and acting person in a very negative situation. And that's for both characters. Now, that book for me was quite a challenge to write, because I'm writing in back and forth between two places. I'm writing scenes in prison, and I'm writing scenes in Texas. And so it was quite a challenge.
The second book is Convict in the Rose, yes?
Yes, The Convict in the Rose. And I'll tell a little quick story about the book cover on that one, because it's kind of cool. While Rick was incarcerated, well, let me back up. Before he ever went to prison, again, he'd spent his entire life working the road, playing music. And in the 60s, like I think it was 1964, Willie Nelson and his second wife, Shirley Colley, came to Texas to do a tour, and they did not have a band to back them up. And so a booking agent contacted Rick and said, "Would you back Willie?" And he said, "Sure, I don't know who he is, but okay." So they did. They backed him on that tour. And so he got to know him and became, somewhat friends. Well, after Rick was incarcerated, at one point, Willie commissioned him to do an album cover for him. And it was going to be called The Convict in the Rose. And I have all the letters back and forth of them talking about what he wanted, how he envisioned it being, and so it is just such a cool story. But anyway, so the book cover of The Convict in the Rose is the actual artwork, some of the artwork that Rick did that was going to be Willie's album cover. The album never was released because about the time they were getting ready to go forward with it was when IRS started looking at Willie. And his attorneys advised him not to have any association with a convict. So that album did not get released. And so therefore all this artwork didn't get used. So when I got ready to publish that book, to me there was no question that had to be the book cover. So that is Rick's artwork on the book cover.
That is just awesome. I
yes,
do remember knowing Willie Nelson.
Well, I'm really kind of excited because not this weekend, but the 16th of February, Willie is coming here to Dallas, and I have a press pass for the show.
Oh, how fun.
Yes, so that should be fun.
Yeah,
and I'm going to take a copy of the book with me, and I hope to be able to put it in his hands.
Way cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, and that was the other thing about some of telling this story is that I had to get permission from people like him to use his name.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't just go and use their names without without getting permission, and you could be sued. So I did have to go through some channels to get permission to add that part of the story, and I got it in writing because I didn't want to come back and have somebody go, oh, you shouldn't have. Anyway, so yeah, Willy is in book 2.
Well, that's just amazing. That is. Okay, so then you mentioned that Rick was in prison. How long was he in?
He was in for 15 years.
Wow. That's a very.
And he was in as a very long time. He was given, and you know, people look at me when I say this. They look at me funny, like, yeah, right, everybody's innocent. But he was convicted for a crime he had not committed. He never went in a bank with a gun and robbed it. He should have been convicted as an accessory to bank robbery, but because he would not tell them what he knew, he got Texas justice. But again, you kind of go back and look at how it all stacked up, and he had created this bad boy image for himself, and they were happy to send him right on through and railroad him right on up.
I can see that happening in Texas, yes.
Mm-hmm. It was. He got Texas justice in 1971. And so he wound up with a 25-year federal sentence and a 50-year state sentence to serve run consecutive 75 years.
Rhani, a friend of yours just commented.
Okay.
Forrest, he just made a statement on here saying basically, you truly have turned a hard time in your life into something beautiful.
Aw, absolutely. Forrest, I'm so glad you're able to listen in tonight. I told you this was going to be an amazing show. Forrest was actually my first guest 2 shows ago, where we talked about his book of poetry.
Right.
So that was another fun show, and I had told him today, I said, Forrest, I said, you got to tune in and hear this tonight.
Oh, well, I'm so glad he did. Yay.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to take a break for a couple of minutes, pay some bills, and listen to some music. And for those of you who are listening, we'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Please stay with us.
And this is G.E. Shaw, Mixar Radio, hosting Rhani Touche and Friends. And this is Reflections.
Living in America, looking for hope, the water's real deep. So I learned to backstroke, can't sleep, gotta stay awoke. It's like a circus sometimes, more material to write my rhymes. Looking at the hourglass in the hands of time, got a lot of thoughts circulating the mind between love and hate. It's a very thin line through the seasons, changing up the paradigm. I don't know Sade, but I know it ain't a crime when you just doing you, ain't speaking on taboo. When making a breakthrough, chilling to stay cool. Reality don't make fools. I read books to study what the greats do. Some calling this a rap, but I'm lucky to get a take 2. So I'ma do what I gotta to win and leave the nonsense just blowing in the wind. Reflections I deliver in another rhyme session, but at times had to learn a hard lesson. Now I'm living this life with these questions. Reflections I delivered in another rhyme session, but at times had to learn a hard lesson. Now I'm living this life with these questions. Reflections. I've been through some trouble, caught up in the mix. It wasn't like a movie, but I'm changing the script. Not trying to live like a lost soul, stuck in Egypt. Hypocrites talk like Kathy Lee and Regis. Even Victoria cannot keep a secret. The evil is apparent, it comes around frequent. Not listening to haters, I give them the silent treatment. I stay focused just to live my life decent, on making my achievement to rise like a phoenix. On that I pledge allegiance, knowing what I believe in. To do hip-hop, I finally found the reason, in harmony with my lyrics and artistry. My talent, I guess just another part of me. When I'm alone, I could turn on the microphone. What can a brother really say? Society is getting more like Rome each and every day. Reflections I deliver in another rhyme session, but at times had to learn a hard lesson. Now I'm living this life with these questions, reflections. I delivered in another rhyme session, but at times had to learn a hard lesson. Now I'm living this life with these questions, reflections. Staying within my element, focus on my development, sticking to my regimen, been dealing with a detriment. Don't say this ain't relevant, the reality is prevalent. The crooked system, been overlooking elephants. My brain is the medicine, the struggle is evident. Plus I got chocolate melanin, feeling like a situation's another experiment, making it hard for me to remain a gentleman. Well, let me rephrase that, a good Samaritan. I got intelligence that I perfect with the excellence, making haters so sick they need a therapist. Gonna keep my head up, most definite, no arrogance, but I'ma say there's no comparison to my flowing, having all my fans knowing. We're back to the point, man, I gotta stay growing to get past a predicament that's ongoing. Reflections, I delivered in another rhyme session, but at times had to learn a hard lesson. Now I'm living this life with these questions, reflections. I delivered in another rhyme session, but at times had to learn a hard lesson. Now I'm living this life with these questions, reflections. I delivered in another rhyme session, but at times had to learn.
And we're back with Rhani, Touche.
Awesome. Well, we were chatting a little bit during the break. I hope you guys are all enjoying the show tonight. I told you this was going to be fun, and it certainly is. You know, I met Jan through a book club that we were both members of, Brave Reviews Book Club. I know I've mentioned it in the past. It is a phenomenal group if you're either a reader or a writer. It's perfect for either of those circumstances. And that was where Jan and I met, and how I first found out about her books, which, let me do a little plug here real quick, Flowers and Stone. Go on Amazon, look it up. It is an amazing book. You will just so totally fall into these characters, I guarantee it. I was quite unhappy when the book ended. Even the one knew that there are more, and I plan to read some of them, but it's still kind of like, you know, when your favorite TV series goes on hiatus, it's like, oh my gosh, you know.
Well, that's music to my ears.
Okay, so when we went to break, Rick was in prison, and he was there for 15 years. How was that for you? I can just imagine the heartbreak of it all.
You know, it was, again, you have to look at my age, and I was so very young, and he told me, he said, you need to forget about me, you need to get on with your life, you deserve a happy life, and you need to forget about me because I'm going to die in here. Those were his words.
Wow.
So I did try to move on with life, and I actually even got married. I married my friend, and once we were married, that friendship dissolved. We should have just stayed friends. So it was a short marriage, but I did have 2 little girls from that marriage.
Oh,
Which was really kind of cool because I got to bring that into our lives once Rick was finally, when he first went into prison, I didn't have any way to contact him. And it was through running into another lady that I danced with, and she was a friend of Rick's, that she told me she had his address. Well, I could not wait until I could sit down and write a letter, and I think I probably wrote at least 10 pages, and we started communicating, and it never stopped. We communicated through letters the entire time that he was in prison. But I really did try to get on with life, and I tried many different things. The man that I married for the short period of time had a Harley, And that was truly my attraction to him, and that's what I was drawn to, because I felt like if I could rebel in some way against the establishment that had put Rick in prison, then that somehow made me feel better. So riding on the back of that Harley, I could feel like I could flip off the world, you know?
Gotcha.
So I did that, and I got heavily into drugs, and it was just an escape. It was an escape. So went through that period, and then I got introduced to a guru, and that turned everything else around, and completely cleaned up from the drugs, and followed the guru, and was a vegetarian for 10 years, and lived that lifestyle. I just kept trying. I kept trying to find something to fill that void. There really wasn't anything.
Well, I mean, the heart wants what the heart wants, and when you know that's somebody that you need in your life, you just can't find anything else that will replace that.
Right, yeah. I tried it all.
Yeah. I mean, heck, even with vegetarian, I'll tell you, kudos for that, girl. I could not.
I was a vegetarian for 10 years and lived in that I guess you would call a hippie style of living, maybe, where I lived in communes. I lived with other people, and we were all following this guru and living these clean, healthy lives. And so, yeah, it was like all these extremes, from one extreme to the other, from being that rebellious, trying to be a tough girl. And let me tell you, I have failed miserably at being a tough girl, because I'm not. I failed miserably, but I put on a good front. And it was all and so all of that journey of the separateness and yet not separate is in that second book, The Convict and the Rose, of trying to figure out how to live with half a heart.
That, the way you just put that, it just says it all. I mean, I can totally feel what you're saying when you say you were living with half a heart. I get it. Mm-hmm. That, yeah, perfect way to express that.
And not seeing any hope, because all of the appeals had been exhausted. There was no hope of him getting out. And if he did get out, where he was in Leavenworth, Kansas, in a maximum security prison. If he did get out of the federal prison, he would go straight to the state. So he kept turning down federal parole and refusing it, because it was common knowledge that it was easier to do time in a federal prison than in a state.
Gotcha.
That conditions are worse in the state prisons than in federal. And so he kept turning down the parole from the feds because he didn't want to go straight to Huntsville.
Well,
Gotcha.
Jan,
wow.
Forrest
What
has
a choice to have to deal with, to live with.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Jan, Forrest has a question for you. He stated, what an amazing life, and why have you not been interviewed on other shows in the past? Many could learn a lot from you.
I have, Forrest. I've been interviewed on many different shows, and I've been on television. And I tell my story anywhere I can. Anyone that will listen will hear my story. Just depends on how much time they have. Sometimes I have to do a more condensed version, and this has been really fun having time to just kind of casually talk. But so yes, in answer to that, I have been on many different shows.
Leavenworth,
I am
Kansas.
very glad that we got you tonight.
Oh, I am too. This has been fun talking. And so from the second book, then it moves on into the third book, and the title of that book was Home at Last. And so that book picks up from when he does finally get paroled. And what it came down to, and this is just kind of a little reality check with our justice system, is what it came down to of getting him paroled from the state of Texas was money.
Really?
That's all it took. It took money. And so I went into debt. He told everybody I bought him out of prison.
Well, when you say money, was it you needed to pay for a good lawyer?
Yes, that's what it took. And it was so funny how all that came about too, because life is so full of synchronicities and things that you just can't you can't foresee or even figure out how it happened. But I was living in Shreveport, Louisiana, and down the street was a little girl who played with my girls. And her mother was a very troubled woman, and she would often come down and just sit with me. She was full of troubles. I never knew exactly what was going on, but it was not good. And anyway, as it turns out, I was talking with her one day and telling her that, we had tried all these different things, and there were all these different people writing letters to the parole board and all this stuff happening to get him out of prison. And she said, my girlfriend in Austin is dating a man who used to be on the state parole board, and he's an attorney. Let me talk to her. Oh, and so she did. And she came back the next day, and she said, here's his name and his phone number, call him. And I did. And I gave him the whole spiel, told him everything from beginning to end. And he said, send me $3,000 and I'll get started. So for $3,000, he got started. And then we had to come up with another $3,000 to finish.
Wow.
But he got him out. And that was all it took. They just took money and the right person.
I guess so.
He knew how the parole board worked because he had sat on it. And
Right.
that was helpful. Yeah.
Right.
So, it was that was kind of a running joke that Rick would tell people that I bought him out of prison.
Well, that must have been some day for him.
It was, he talked about it, and he said he just kept being afraid that it was a dream, and he would wake up and still be in there.
Wow.
And after, when he was released, they offered to buy him a plane ticket. Well, he had never been on an airplane. He didn't want to do that. And so they bought him a bus ticket to come home. And he said the whole way on the bus from Kansas to the middle of Texas, which takes a while to get there, he kept checking his pocket and making sure he had his parole papers, and just kept expecting the bus to be pulled over and police to get him. I mean, he just knew that it wasn't real, that if something was going to happen, that was going to get sent back.
Now, what year was he released?
It was released in 1985.
So he went in there about 1970.
Yep.
Yeah, and that would be a totally different world.
Oh my gosh. And so the third book is all about that, and all about that it was a very hard adjustment to come back. Everything was different. The roads were different. In 1970, you didn't have middle turn lanes. Everything was different.
Right.
It was shocked at the cost of a loaf of bread. That was a huge adjustment. It really was. And it was a good while before he ever even attempted to drive. I did all the driving. It was just, I don't know, it was hard.
I can't imagine, basically being in a cell for 15 years, not being in a vehicle at all, and then now you're back out in the world, and not only are the cars themselves different, but the roads, like you were saying, the roads were bigger.
Yeah,
Traffic probably seemed insane to him.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And so I think it was probably very good that he paroled to this small town. And the reason that he did was because it was where he was from, and his mother still lived there, and his brother, and so that was where he needed to go, and really that was where he needed to go. It would have been very difficult for him to have tried to incorporate back into the world in a big town.
I can imagine.
All of the rush and all of the, So that was the right thing to do.
When he was in prison, was he still involved with music?
Yes. Yeah, he was. And that's all in book 2. He actually built, and this is such a phenomenal thing to me, because it's never been done. It hasn't been done since, and it was never done before. But he built a recording studio inside Leavenworth Prison.
Wow.
And he did it with no funding.
Wow.
He advocated for this. He advocated for years, trying to convince them that this would be good for the inmates, that there were so many inmates that were talented, that were musicians, that were writers, that it would be good for them. And finally, a new warden came through and was willing to take a chance. And the way he did it was he wrote a song called From the Bottle to the Needle. And he said it many times that it was the only contrived song he ever wrote in his entire life. But he wanted to write this song and wanted to get it to the warden, wanted him to hear it, because it's all about how choices in life can really land you in some places that you don't want to be, and that 90% of the people in prison, it was behind alcohol and drugs that they were there. 90% of them. So anyway, he wrote this song called From the Bottle to the Needle, and he played it for an associate warden, and he liked it, and he said, let me set up a meeting, we'll get the warden, and you'll play it for him. So they did. And then after he finished playing the song, the warden said, I'm going to take a chance on you. I'll designate an area for you to use. You can build a recording studio. We have no funding. We have nothing to offer you. So the convicts, being as resourceful as they are, literally took bits and pieces of tossed away electronic equipment and things that had been discarded and thrown over in the corner, and they built a recording studio and recorded music in it.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is amazing. And so I wanted to know for sure what happened to it before when I wrote The Convict and the Rose. And so I called the prison and I talked to the Director of Education and Recreation. And he said, yes, there was a studio here. And he said it met its demise in 1986. So when Rick left, there was nothing there. There was nobody that had what it took to keep it going.
Wow.
I have one more question
the
here.
Music.
I have one more question, if you don't mind.
Okay.
First of all, Forrest made the statement that music therapy is still underutilized. More institutions
I agree.
should use it. And my comment is also there's a therapy out there called art therapy. You very familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
And that's another one that is very underutilized. A lot of people don't have a lot of respect for that. Society doesn't respect it that much too, though. I think that's what one of the problems is. And I'm done, so you can go back to your conversation.
That is very true, though. What you just said is very true. And it was literally the way that Rick survived 15 years in prison and came out with his soul still intact was through art. He did all kinds of art, not just music and not just writing poetry, but drawing and he learned to do oil paintings and he learned to do Indian beadwork and he did leather work and he made ceramics. I mean, just immersed himself into creativity. And that was really the way that he was able to do that time and come out still a whole person.
He must have been the most incredible man. I just can't imagine going through what he went through and keeping his spirit intact, keeping his mind straight, and you know, focusing on whatever he needed to focus on to keep him from going nuts in there.
Right, and that was it. It was like when he first went in, he was very angry and very bitter. And he was determined that he was going to let everybody know that. And it took a few years for him to decide that he was not going to change prison and that prison was not going to change him. And he made up his mind that he was going to do his time. He was going to be a positive person. He was going to act and think and do positive things. And that completely changed everything from that point on. That was such a turning point.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the second book really is all about, is that anybody in any situation can make that choice to either wallow in it and be negative or turn it around and find something positive to come out from it. And that's what he did. But it took a while. It wasn't easy. And he fought it for years and spent a lot of time in the hole.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I have to know, how tall was Rick?
He was 6'2".
Okay, he was a big guy then.
He was a big guy. Yeah. And the other thing that I really haven't even touched on tonight, because there's just so much to talk about, but the other thing that I haven't even touched on is that when I decided to do the story and to publish the books, I decided that I also wanted to release a music CD of his music with each book that matches the time period of that story. So the music I released with the first book was music I took off of his 45 RPM records that he had made. And you can still hear some of the needle scratches, but we did the best we could to master it out in the studio and it's good, but you can still hear those little bitty needle scratches if you listen close. And then the second book, the music I released with that one, every song on that CD was recorded in that studio in Leavenworth except for the title track.
Wow.
And I call there was a song that I found in going through things that was called 40 Foot High, and it was all about the walls. The walls were 40 foot high. And I had never heard him sing it. I didn't know how it went. I did not have any clue. So I approached one of the musicians that I know here and said, would you put music to this? And he said yes. And we went into a studio here and recorded it. And it's called 40 Foot High. But yeah, so all of the songs on that second CD were recorded inside the walls, except for that one song.
That's just incredible. So these CDs, is there someplace I can go and buy them?
They're all on Amazon. They're on iTunes, Spotify. They're everywhere music can be found, but they are all on Amazon as well.
And you would just Amazon and look for Rick Sikes?
Yeah, and it'll bring up every one of them.
Awesome.
So that was the other part that I hadn't even talked about, that I hadn't even touched on, was that I did release music because I wanted to, it was a way to kind of keep it out there.
Right.
And not just let it die.
Right. No, I get that absolutely. I'm glad that you told me that there is so much more that you can talk about because we are kind of out of time for tonight, but I really want you back.
Oh, I would love to. This was fun. It was very relaxing, and it just felt like I'm just sitting here chatting with you.
That's kind of what we wanted. Unlike when Greg and I are doing the show together, then it is not always so relaxing. But okay, I'm going to thank you now. This was wonderful. I'm so glad you agreed to come on the show. I have had so much fun talking with you tonight. I want to thank Forrest for his comments and everybody else who was listening tonight. I'm so glad you guys were able to tune in. And we will definitely be bringing Jan back at a future time so that we can talk about her other books and more about this incredible relationship she had with Rick. I see bits and pieces on Twitter, to do with your books, but I really just was not able to know that much. And even reading Flowers and Stone only takes you so far into the relationship. So
that's just the beginning.
Exactly.
And I do want to say too, really quickly, Rhani, that I do have a website which is jansikes.com, and it has all of the books, all of the music, has everything on my website as well.
Awesome. And just to clarify, it's SIKES, not SY.
Yes. Yeah, it's an I.
Yes. So, okay, well, I'm going to let you go, and I just wanted to thank you again. This was wonderful, and I will definitely be hitting you up to come back.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Rhani.
Thank you, and thank all of you listeners, and I'm going to turn it back over to Greg to close us out.
Okay. Well, you just got through listening to Rhani and Friends with Jan Sikes, well-known writer. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with another show from Rhani and Friends. Until then, this is G.E. Shaw, and this is Mixar Radio Tonight. And this is It Don't Really Matter.
In this spirit, getting played. Too tipsy. Breakouts music.
It's Lagos Evil Boy.
And you are listening to G.E. Shaw Mixar Radio tonight. And we just finished with Rhani and friends. She will be back in 2 weeks with another show and another guest. Until then, you're listening to Gentlemen to Tipsy. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that group name right. If not, sorry. This is Gentlemen. And after that, we'll be closing out the show. And I will be seeing you tomorrow night on Late Night with G.E. Shaw. Until then, you have a good evening.
Like
and if you can't love me now, liebe mich später, meine Frau. Girl, hold up, can I get a minute? I want to talk something that I really mean. Can I be your gentleman? Make I be your gentleman. Hold up, can I get a minute? I want to talk something that I really mean. Can I be your gentleman? Make I be your gentleman. I can do anything for your company, as long as you choose to stay with me. I will show you love always. My love for you is real, I would die for you. I never will fool around, cause I'm deep into it. My love for you not be washed, cause I've dived too deep. You're the only one, I swear on it. I will show you love that you never forget. Baby girl, vibe to this. You and I living in a paradise, oh yeah. Can you imagine this? You and I having an amazing place. Te quiero conmigo, soy más que un amigo. And if you can't love me now, liebe mich später, meine Frau. And if you can't love me now, liebe mich später, meine Frau. Can I get a minute? I want to talk something that I really mean. Can I be a gentleman? Make I be a gentleman. Hold up. Can I be a gentleman? Make I be a gentleman. Flocken before you. And if you can't love me now, liebe mich später, meine Frau.
Hello, this is G.E. Shaw once again. If you've been thinking about learning how to get into a new career dealing with podcasting, online radio, streaming radio, all the different names out there, you ought to try out my friends at Anchor. That's www.anchor.fm. They give you the best of everything for podcasting, especially people who are just starting out. Unlimited free hosting, which means you don't pay for it. One-click distribution. And this one-click distribution gets you to all the major players out there. Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, every platform out there. Anchor does all the work. Monetization for podcasts, something new that Anchor has just brought on. If you want your listeners out there listening to you, and they love listening to you, have them make a donation. That's Anchor. And you can record from everywhere. Anchor. www.anchor.fm. Check it out. You won't forget it. This is G.E. Shaw, Mixar Radio. See you later.
Are you an independent musician? How would you like to have your songs played on hundreds of radio stations just like the one you're listening to right now? Join MusicSubmit.com and we'll promote your music to radio stations and blogs in your genre. It's free to set up your account, and we guarantee your music will be considered for airplay by radio stations worldwide. Why not sign up today? It's free. MusicSubmit.com, radio promotion for indie musicians.